heavy.
Bored.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot. I mean, the changing, not just the landscape and the business side of it, the industry, but like the cultural significance of what DFW was doing. Yeah, put out a book and people would judge it on the literary merits. There wasn't this like personality. There wasn't like yeah, mostly it's politics now. I mean, it's like you put your politics out there on your social media thing, and then you're judged according to that, and not necessarily your body of work or with the work itself on the page and all that. And and that puts writers in a weird position. And now when you're tweeting out or something to promote your work, not only are you just trying to promote your work, people are taking that as if you're making like political statements that you hold deeply, that that you like these deep political beliefs or something. It's like, nah, like that's not how this ever worked until like 5 years ago, dude. Like this is a
Well,
new
yeah, and I
fucking
think
thing.
people, I heard a lot of this when I was in the MFA too. And maybe I would imagine this is maybe more of an MFA thing, um, where you would have someone write a character that was maybe not a good person, and it was taken as the stand-in for the writer's actual
beliefs
beliefs and yeah,
yeah,
so like
yeah.
That's a
so
scandal every week, dude. That's a scandal every week on literary Twitter. Like
Yeah.
we all know
Yeah.
it. Like like that.
so
Literally.
you write a character who is not a good person, God forbid either, like, I mean, and I'm not even talking like anti-heroes, like I'm talking
Yeah.
about like the villain of the story.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was a main character who was supposed to change over time or whatever it was. I didn't take the fiction workshop, so I just, heard all the
Yeah.
cool gossip. And I had one friend who was I think pretty routinely by a couple of people, it was suggested that maybe he was a bit racist.
Oh no. In
because
workshop.
because he wrote characters that were racist. Not all of them, but like on occasion there had to be a character who was racist because he also perceived himself as like a Southern writer.
Flannery O'Connor style.
And I found that interesting. Like I thought, at maybe like at the graduate level, like we would have an understanding that like, and I'm sure that is there too. Like I'm sure that there are those situations where like you have students that are, writing work that are clearly intended like I to be some kind of stand-in for their beliefs, but I imagine that is a little bit more apparent.
It's something I see with DFW criticism too. Like the haters love to harp on him for stuff other than the writing, other than the work that he left behind. But I don't know.
Which,
not to
yeah,
throw this hot
and
potato
I
at
think
you,
that's
Lee. Just
I
like,
think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, throw me the hot stuff.
What do you think
that was
about?
always just a curiosity about it. Let's talk about racism.
Yeah.
Are you racist?
Already.
Or how do you feel
Yeah.
about racism?
Do you like the Nazis?
Are you a fan of Kanye?
Yeah, what was the Kanye question? Do you like Hitler? I can just, get a good soundbite.
Yeah, sorry, we don't mean to ruin your career in this interview here. Where you're going to be
we
pegged
can
as
cut out anything.
Yeah, we can cut
Go
out that.
for it.
It's okay.
Go for it.
My career is already over. I started the last one with 3 Hitlers just to get it out of my system.
Sophie was just like, yeah. We do have the protection though, so we have the Jewish on our side so you can get away
The
with
Jewish.
It. Yes.
The Jewish.
The Jew.
That's in fact what I go by.
I wanted.
Jewish.
I'm Sophie the Jewish
I
Weiner.
wanted to make sure
That's
I
what
was.
they call me.
I wanted to make sure I was othering it as much as I could. But yeah, like.
I am Jew. As Kanye would tell us.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to throw all that at you, Lee, but yeah.
No,
DFW.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is just to talk about current literature a little bit. I don't know. I have a hard time locating things that move me in the same way that are published now because there is so much noise. And I don't find myself sort of like wanting to read older work or something to stay out of it. But then I'm like, I really want to connect to the current conversation, but I have a hard time really like accessing what makes me feel that way. I don't know if that's
that
a
makes
good way of
perfect
saying
sense
that.
to me.
You're
I feel
not
like we
alone,
talk
yeah.
about that all the time. There's like I have that urge all the time to stick to. I mean, oh, right after I left the program, I think that was when like I bought a ton. This is when we were first talking about the podcast. Like I bought all of this Edith Wharton. I was like, this is all I'm
Nice.
reading. This is all I'm reading for like the next year. And that's really
Uh-huh.
most of what I read for the next year. And it was
Uh-huh.
like all I really craved was, you know, and a lot of it was, I guess, fiction. Maybe I was just like, I need a break from poetry for a minute.
Hmm.
Um, but
And then,
yeah, I feel the same way. I feel overwhelmed by how much there is in contemporary literature, and not just how much, but like um, I find myself struggling to connect with it the same way. And every once in a while, I mean, this is true of most books of poetry. It's a
Sure.
rare thing where I find a book of poetry that I'm like through and through at like there is not a poem in here that I could say is like meh, you know.
Hmm.
And it's rare that I find something that floors me and makes me feel the way, you feel reading Emily Dickinson. I mean, there are a handful of contemporary writers that do that for me. One of them is like Alison Bennis White is the first person that came to mind. Um, but yeah, it's so much noise. And you honestly, it's hard to know, I think. It's hard to know what the genuine recommendations are because, again, I think this is just a fact about the literary world is that you're leaning on your friends to promote you,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, it's really rare, I think, that you find a review that is openly critical or as critical of a book as it is praising
Hmm.
a book.
dude,
Hmm.
even 5 years ago, dude, like if you pick up even a New Yorker like from 2015, 2014, like there are more critical in the reviews than they are now. And then
And
not all the time, but
and I
yeah.
don't mean like, we should be writing reviews that are like, this book is bad, don't buy it. That's not even,
Yeah.
I don't think that's what we're saying either. I'm not saying we should all be doing a Halliday and putting out that particular review of Ben Lerner's The Hatred of Poetry, though I don't suppose we did it much more justice. Um, But I do think that there's something to be said for being able to like look at poetry or at any literature. Like it's hard to know, I think, who's reviewing because this is a
Right.
book that they believe is like you need to read this book. It's really wonderful, or this is my friend and I want to sell their book. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it feels like there's so much noise. It's so hard. Um, I
Well,
mean, you can rely on like the big contest winners
it's like
too,
For
but
poetry.
but I don't always find a home there either.
for
So,
what it is, like and we're not blaming anybody, listeners, either. Like it's like how do you blame people for a cultural milieu that's kind of evolved over a decade or whatever to make it what it is? I mean, is it a
Well, it's
combination of
huge.
things, like a combination of the industry kind of not being what it was, not making as much money as it was because the sales are down. So now the editors are worse. Now like the people
Hmm.
inside the publishing house are worse. And maybe are they just publishing stuff that isn't as good, isn't as resonant as some would say? Like, and I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a great point, like, because everybody's feeling that, right? I think most literature lovers are feeling something similar right now. At least like this last like 5, 6 years. I don't know what it is. Like it just maybe it's this thing where we're talking about like risk, the ability to try something or try something and maybe it sucks or it fails, like it doesn't quite work. I don't know. I mean, less chance of risk because the industry is not as prone to accepting and absorbing that financial risk to publish an experimental book by somebody like a DFW or I don't know. I mean, a combination of that and then of course the kind of group social media dynamics that we've been kind of talking about this whole time with like it's just part of the industry now is this
Hmm.
dynamics of everybody gets to tell you what they think right away in real time kind of thing. And if a bunch of people are piling on, well, that can affect the publication. We've seen publications pulled. We've seen people losing their contracts, whatever it is, because one person, makes a comment, and you don't even have the text yet. The book isn't fucking out yet, but somebody
Right.
knows or made a
Right.
claim, and then it spreads like wildfire, and the publisher doesn't stand behind the author. They get scared. When in reality, it would actually boost sales probably if they just
well, and
stood
this is
behind their
something
author.
that's a phenomenon also, I think, with like often bigger names too, right? Like people who are doing pretty big sales.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, do you see that? Like, and this is, for both of you. Like, I don't know if I see this, and maybe it's just because I'm not reading enough. But I don't know if hear that kind of controversy the same way with lesser known or debut authors.
I feel like it can. I'm so out of the conversation recently, but I feel like what was the book? It was like 2 years ago that it was a white woman who wrote that book about Mexico, and that was her
American
debut, I
Dirt.
think.
American
American
Dirt.
Dirt. Janine
Yeah,
Cummings. I remember it
yeah.
well.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
But it got
And
a
I
lot of
remember,
hype for a debut, unlike most
Right.
debuts. So, yeah.
I
I
would
mean,
imagine that helped their sales
yeah,
overall.
oh, for sure, for sure.
and that's an example where they
Um,
did stand by her. The publisher didn't pull the book because they put. So I think part of we'll get to this. The jealousy, the professional jealousy, I think is a big part of this too, where she got a big deal. She got a 7-figure deal where they sold the book rights and the movie rights at the same time because she was writing a pop kind of thriller page turner book, and it was set in this Mexico fleeing the cartel to America or whatever is the overall plot. I didn't read the book, but I remember the scandal. It was insane, and there's like you know they stood by her, but I remember like she was forced to kind of go through these. I remember listening to an NPR interview where it was her and 4 other people all against her. Even the moderator, like the NPR journalist, was not on her side, and she basically just had to sit there and be lambasted, called a racist. Nobody saying that any of this, and she just kind of had to take it. And I guess it did go away eventually, and she's publishing more books now. But it's like, yeah, that never used to happen.
Well, this is
that's a
where
new
you see the
thing.
critical
Like,
review. This is where you see a critical, well, I mean, would we call it critical? We would call it, I guess it depends on how we're using the word. This is where I guess we would see like a negative review, not necessarily a review that is looking at it with a particularly critical eye.
there were a lot of negative reviews, and a lot of them.
Yeah.
There's a few journalists that did some work on this that you people listeners can look it up. Like a lot of the reviews, people that wrote them did not read the book. They were saying things were in the book that were not there. Like it was that bad.
right,
It was
right.
that bad, and nobody was coming to her defense. Even because if they did, they were you were done. You could lose everything if you did. Kind of.
Yeah. But also it's a great example of there being such a chasm between like literary people and lay people's opinions. Like normal readers don't give a fuck about this stuff. Like they were still they were buying and loving the book. And then like this small
They want to be entertained.
yeah, and like what and so it's I don't know. People just like to scream about things sometimes.
I remember that because it was a huge deal in the literary world, and that's who was mostly getting upset about it, which is why they were doing all these NPR segments and stuff. And then it was like, or my mother, like a couple months after the hoopla settled down, she was like, "Oh, I'm just reading this great book. It was on Oprah's book club, And my mother's that type of reader, and she's like, "Oh, I got American Dirt," and I was like, "Oh yeah, like yeah."
Well, it's like the J.D. Vance book too, Hillbilly Elegy. Like,
Right.
I read that one and I was like, all right, but it was huge. That book
Right.
was huge, but like
Oh,
literary
they
people
taught it.
hated it.
Oh, everyone was teaching that book at the school I went to, the MFA.
And I think
Really?
yeah. Well,
It was in
Until it
Kentucky.
became not okay. Oh yeah.
Oh no, I was in Kentucky. So
Okay.
So the Appalachian kind of
Right. Claim to fame.
But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of this jealousy too. You saw it with that too. So I'm sure Vance got a big book deal on that because he went to Stanford, probably knew people. He's not a writer, right? He wrote this fucking memoir. People were pissed that this guy, this non-writer, got an advance and then got sales, so then got checks after the initial contract, which is rare, right? So everybody gets upset about that. I think you saw this. Who was that writer that wrote Sweet Bitter?
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
yeah,
can't
I
remember her
do.
name. Anyway,
I
she
know what
blew
you're
up.
talking about.
She blew up with that first book or whatever. And when you read a lot of the reviews, they were so focused. She got a nice big 6-figure advance, which is incredibly rare. Top 1% of 1% in the industry, right? Especially because she's doing like a literary kind of work. Like people were obsessed with the fact that she got a bigger advance than everybody else in the field and she needed to pay for it, right? Or she didn't deserve it, or she needed to be taken down a notch, or I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just human bitterness, jealousy, like we can't do anything about those things. But
Yeah, but if you're just like engaged in that conversation, if you're on Twitter all the time and like just reading all the stuff, it's like it's only going to stoke the fire and make you more bitter and angry. And what does that have to do with writing
Oh, what
at
does Twitter
all?
do but make you bitter?
I know. I don't know. I mean, I use social media, but it's like at a certain point, it's like, what benefit is it to you to be so angry about things you can't control? I don't know.
Especially about books. Like, this is a fictional fucking thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's made up. It sits on the shelf, and then now we have to pretend that it's like some catastrophic, like, world-ending thing. Somebody published a book. Like, and
Well, it's
like,
entirely possible, Andy, that it hurts someone's feelings.
yeah.
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored,
Some activities are intentional, right?
it shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.